parents, caregivers, siblings, and in that non-shared environment, teachers, counselors, and everyone else can have a major impact on how someone's social skills develop, how their communication skills develop, and whether someone can get to their best possible self. So I don't ever mean to say that genetic influence is something deterministic. And for people who are socially adept, that stage, that social stage is broadly illuminated. So, in other words, they can see everything that's going on. Now, they'll spend most of their time probably focused on center stage because they know that's where most of the main social interaction or social information is going to take place. But they can also gather context. So they can see what's happening in the background, what the mood is, what the vibe is in a room. And for socially adept people, they naturally take in all this information, and this is naturally how they see the social world. Now, for awkward people, it's very different. When awkward people see their social stage, they don't see it broadly illuminated. Rather, what attention studies and cognition studies have shown us is that awkward people see their social stage spotlighted. And that spotlight does not fall center stage. So here they have this kind of narrow, highly focused view of the world, and that spotlight tends to fall off center stage by analogy. As you can imagine, the awkward person is missing out on a ton of important social information. Now, their gaze is directed elsewhere, and that'll become interesting for us. But in the short term, when it comes to an immediate social interaction, this can be a real problem. This kind of gets to actually the root of the word awkward. I kind of nerded out on this a little bit when I was looking into what awkward means. It comes from an Old Norse word, afugur, and that means facing a different direction. I actually really just love the etymology of that because it so well captures how awkward people see the world. They're just facing a different direction, and there's consequences for that, some of which can be problematic in certain contexts, but other times can actually be a real asset. So here's a good example of how this it takes place in research studies. So you might have seen things with facial expressions and how different muscles move on your face can be one cue of the emotion that somebody's having. Now they have these cool studies where they can actually track their eye tracking studies. They can track what you're looking at on a computer screen within millimeters. And so what they'll do is they'll bring people into the lab and they'll say, "Hey, we're going to show you pictures of people on this computer screen, and just take a look at the face, and then we'll have some questions for you later." And what those questions are later is, "Hey, what emotion was that person feeling?" Now, remember, they're tracking folks' eyes as they're looking at all these pictures. And what they find is that socially adept people, so most people, reflexively go to the eye region. So without thinking about it, they immediately go to the eyes, and that's the right place to go. And because the eyes really are the window to the soul, as they say, it's the most information-rich area of the face. Now, what do awkward people do in this same setup? What awkward kids do is they'll reflexively look at the chin or they'll look at the corner of the ear. Now, if you're ever talking to someone who's socially awkward and has difficulty with eye contact, sometimes you feel like they're looking over your shoulder. That's a good intuition. They're actually looking at the corner of your ear, and it's a habit they'll need to break. But when they do fMRI studies of folks and they look at the emotional processing when they're looking at pictures of emotional expressions, we can kind of see this difference between how socially adept people and socially awkward people process emotional information and process facial expressions. So, for someone who's socially adept, they look in the eyes, they discern the emotion, it's not a problem. For socially awkward people, when they look someone in the eyes, it's kind of like staring into the sun for too long. It's just way too intense. They are getting social information, but it's too much. And the emotional intensity of that and how intensely their brain processes those cues is overwhelming. And so, what awkward kids learn very early on in life, kind of all on their own, reflexively, is to avert their eyes from someone else's eyes because it helps to dampen and regulate their emotion. And Unfortunately, one of the things that happens is that when an awkward kid's looking at a chin or at the corner of someone's ear, other people can interpret that as rudeness or as disinterest. They might be looking there so in fact that they can listen to you. They're looking at your chin or looking over your shoulder so they can regulate their emotion and actually listen and take in what you're saying. So it's just a totally different kind of interpretation. So awkward people have that spotlighted focus. Remember that focus tends to fall anywhere but center stage a lot of times. That has downstream consequences. The emotional tone and vibe, as the kids would say these days, that you bring to a situation is one of the most important things. Because when you see someone being awkward or you see someone doing something that doesn't conform to social expectation, the natural thing is to get vicariously anxious for them. And we can be so well intended, but accidentally add our anxiety, right? The energy that's already going on there. Now, what my dad would do, my mom would do in those situations is they would be very intentional about just being very matter of fact, very even. And that was a big deal for me to regulate my emotions. So that would be one of the first takeaways I'd have for you about some tips for helping folks along with this. When we would go out in public, my parents would we'd get there, they would park, they would then turn around and they'd say, Ty, it's time to mentally prepare. Now, why are we here? Would oftentimes be the first question. And that might sound so common sense to you all if you're socially adept, but for me, I had it hadn't even entered my mind, even though this was a conversation we had dozens of times before. Almost surprised I'd say, well, we're here to eat, you know? And so at least I'm oriented to the purpose of why we're there. They say things like, what's the first thing you need to do when you walk in the door? I'd have to stop and think about it. I'd say, I need to look and see if there's a line. Now, I needed to walk through this because sometimes I had cut in the line, and it was because I didn't see the line. If you go back to that spotlight example, I was so narrowly focused in how I was taking in my information, I just honestly wouldn't see the line. So I had to prep myself for this. Now I need to get my money out. I need to figure out what I'm going to order. All right, what do you do when you get to the clerk? I have to look her in the eye. I need to say please. I need to say thank you. When I get my food, I need to turn around slowly so I don't spill it all over the person behind me, which I had done once or twice before. So we would go through these mental preparations for all kinds of things. And I'm sure I was a brat about it sometimes. But thank goodness my parents did it. It was exactly what I needed. I still remember to this day when I was in 11th grade, awkwardness is kind of for life, but when I was in 11th grade, even though I developed a lot of social skills by that point, like ordering at a restaurant, there were still things I didn't do very well. One of the things I'd been taught was to, when you shake someone's hand, give them a really good grip, right? Give them a good solid grip. I had this teacher, Mrs. Adams. She was one of my favorite teachers. And I went in there and just kind of almost crushed her hand. I went to shake her hand one day and she didn't say anything. She said, Ty, can I talk to you for 1 sec? And after the other two students had left the room, she said, hey, just so you know, go a little more moderate on the grip. Not a big deal. It's okay. But not everyone's ready for the tight grip. And boy, do I appreciate that. To this day, if you shake hands with me, Mrs. Adams' voice is still in the back of my head as I go to do that. And there's been dozens, if not hundreds of people over the years who have helped me with these little tips here and there to learn to develop my social skills. These are the things that actually matter in social relationships. This is actually the goodness. And one of the things to know for kids who are socially adept or socially awkward is that none of the social skill affects any of these three factors. Awkward kids are just as fair and kind and loyal as anybody else. It's just sometimes they have a hard time getting through those first 5 minutes to show people that they have these skills just as much as anyone. Right now.
Fabulous. I learned so much. Tell me if I got this right. Okay. So, with an awkward child, an awkward spouse, friend, these things that are very helpful have that conversation perhaps about space and be awareness for them,
Sure.
about eye contact,
Mhm.
about how the amount of time, the 3 how long was, that eye contact that you suggested? Was it
I'll go through. Let's go 3 seconds, 3 to 1. So,
3 seconds?
yep,
Okay. Okay. A good exit,
yep,
controlling your passion, as and then let them, be specific about what you're teaching, why you're teaching that. I love what you said about we do this because,
yeah.
and then that preparation, helping them prepare mentally before a social setting. How did I do? Did I get
You did
some?
great. Wow, A plus.
Okay, okay, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So now I'm the parent of a child.
Mm-hmm.
Help me with the words that I can use. Um, specifically, what can I say?
Yeah.
What's most important?
Sure. Well, one of the things is just how you enter the conversation, and so just a great way to do that is say, "Hey, no big deal, but just so you know," or "Hey, no big deal. I just wanted to mention," and I think that's important because kids they want to do the right thing, right? And so just to come in there with, "Hey, this isn't," and that's tone regulation to say, "Hey, this isn't a big deal."
Mhm.
I think that's what I'd advise. And then if you use that structure, if you think, "Hey, we do social skills to actually be fair, to be kind, and to be loyal." If you kind of have that hierarchy in your head, that's a nice way to get from we do this thing because, and then you go to fairness or kindness or loyalty.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So now you're in an elevator in a very tall skyscraper. You see a parent with a child, and you just know you want to hand them your book, but you can't because you don't have a copy with you. But if you could turn around and tell them something, what would you want to say to them for that elevator
Mm,
ride?
sure. Yeah. I mean, to tell you the truth, I probably wouldn't say anything. But if I could, or I needed to, um, I guess I find myself that in position sometimes where I'm put in a position that I do need to say something, and I usually don't talk to the parent. I usually just talk to the kid, and I'll say, I think one of the things as teachers that is so easy for any of us to forget is that the person's doing what they're doing because they thought it was a good idea. It's not because
Mhm,
none of us want to be wrong, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
so let me just to give a quick tangential example. There's a party the other night. I got put in charge of helping the kids with the candied apples. And so uh, there was no other adult supervision. I don't know why they let the bachelor be in charge of this, but there's the kids with these apples, and they have these stakes, and I'm seeing them about to put the stake through the apple with their hand on the bottom.
mhm,
And I want my reflex was to admonish them for doing that because I don't want them to put the stick through their hand.
mhm,
Fortunately, I caught myself. I said, "Okay, let's just stop real quick. No big deal." Once again, I that's a good idea to hold the apple that way because that's actually
mhm,
that's the best grip, and I can see why you're doing that. Just one
mhm,
thing, no, if you go too far, it might
mhm,
hurt you. So let's do it
mhm,
this other way. So I
mhm,
think that's what I try to do with the social stuff. I say, "Hey, I think I see maybe what you're trying to do here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Um, I get that. Just so you know, another thing you could try is," and then you give them right the other options.
mhm.
Yeah, it's embarrassing, right? So when we, it's embarrassing already when we do something awkward. When someone calls us out on it, it gets even more embarrassing. But for kids, they need to have that happen. So I think the general framework, we've talked about some specific things here, but the general attitude is how do I minimize the shame and embarrassment in the situation as much as possible? And of course, all of you want to do that. And so I hope some of these specific things we've talked about just give you a few footholds to execute on that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You've got a quick question here that just came to me. What's the question you most get when you're giving this presentation?
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, a lot of times people are concerned about me. So they say, "Hey,
Mm.
are you doing all right?" So
Wonderful.
sometimes I forget to say things worked out well. Um,
Oh,
and I think folks should know that uh, life worked out really well, but life worked out really well for me because I decided pretty early on in high school that although I didn't have the research, um, the people I looked up to, the peers I looked up to, were people who embodied the fairness, the kindness, and the loyalty, you know?
Mhm,
And so I said, well, that's actually what matters, right? And this
mhm,
other stuff, yeah, I should try to pick that up, but
mhm,
um, that seems to be the good stuff. And thank goodness, for whatever reason, I landed on that. And
mhm,
I've tried. I obviously make mistakes, and I'm not always my best possible self, but
mhm,
I felt very blessed to have amazing friends and great relationships, and have a really rich social life.
mhm. You know what occurs to me, how the sensitivity you have brought to the world because of your experience, and that's something that's unique, that might not have happened had you sailed through. Am I right about that? Well, anyway, before I go on,
Yeah.
there's just a couple of really quick questions.
Mm.
How much should you focus on eye contact for a child with this aversion, knowing that it might be dysregulating?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for what you said, and yes, you do gain in humility. I
Mhm,
think from being socially clumsy, it's just like wow, not things aren't easy for everybody,
mhm,
whether it's
mhm.
social skill or something else. And so, yeah, I
Mm,
think you do get that. The eye
mhm,
contact thing, it's painful. I'll tell you
mm,
that. And if you're a parent or teacher who's struggling with that with a
mhm,
kid, um, good on you for doing it. I would say, the first thing is just like start it in the home and just start it in small doses. So
okay.
I have a friend who's actually high functioning autistic, who I never knew. Actually, I'd known her for 8 years, and I never knew she had been diagnosed in childhood. And she said her parents would just sit there and they'd say, "Hey, look, just for 2 minutes, we're gonna do this eye contact thing, and let's do 3 seconds on, 1 second off." And they had a little
Mhm,
timer there, and she would look away to the timer actually.
yeah.
And yeah, and they're like, "Hey, it's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just whatever."
Mhm,
I think
mhm,
a breakthrough for me, for folks to know, is that I had this kind of realization on my own when I was in middle school. Um, I would have to practice social skill a lot in a way that was a
mhm,
little bit embarrassing for me. I just do it
mhm,
privacy of my own home, but um, I had this friend who struggled in math and went in most days before school to get tutoring. And he was talking to me about it, and his face blushed. He turned red, and I could tell he was embarrassed. Obviously, he had to get this tutoring. And I said, "Hey, I totally respect you for for going
mhm,
in and doing the hard work to do what you need to do." And then it just clicked for me. I'm like,
mhm.
that's the same thing for me and these social skills. There's no shame in it, right?
No.
There's in fact, you just have some self-respect that you're willing to have the humility and put in the work to make that happen. So if you can impart that on your student or on your child, I think that's a really positive way to frame it.
Mhm. Well, we've learned so much from you today, and I can't wait to come back and listen to you. And I hope the people that have listened at noon will share that we'll be back again at 7 p.m. tonight, and we'll reach even more people, and we'll do our bit to make the world easier for everyone. I thank you so much. This is a
Hey,
wonderful conversation.
thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time. Take care. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Let's begin the questions. Bianca, you are up.
Hi, Dr. Tashiro. So I really enjoyed the presentation. I think it was great. I thought it was especially funny when you were talking about how um like off like non-awkward wives tend to talk to their awkward husbands first because that's exactly how my parents are. And it
Oh,
was just
really?
like,
That's
yeah,
great.
exactly. And it was
Okay.
just like it was such like an accurate reflection of like the situations that I see. So
Hmm.
I guess my question is like do you think there's like a stigma against being awkward? And like if so, like how do we like fix that? Because I feel like at least like in my high school, normally being awkward is like a negative thing.
Sure. Yeah. Bianca, thanks for the insight on your folks. That's great to hear. And thanks for the question. That's a really good question. Yeah, there's unfortunately, right, which can be tough. There's a stigma against being awkward. I think, high school is just middle school and high school are just kind of tough in general, right? Because probably know this firsthand, right? A lot of people feel insecure about their social lives in high school, whether they're socially adept or socially awkward, you know? And I think sometimes that insecurity that everybody's feeling can get displaced onto other folks, and so they see someone who's being socially awkward, and it's an opportunity to kind of externalize their own anxiety onto somebody else, right? And while we can intellectually know this, and we're like, okay, I understand that intellectually, it can still be really hard emotionally, right? And through lived experience to have that happen. So it's unfortunate. It's timeless, I'll tell you. It used to actually be a little bit worse, if that makes it makes things any better. You could, in my day, back in the day, you were called a nerd, and that was like the kiss of death, socially. Um, now there's a little bit of, I'm not saying it's easy, but there's a little bit of like, it's a little bit more okay to be awkward. And so I think maybe one of the advantages is that if someone feels awkward, since it's more talked about, I think it's like sometimes easier to find other awkward friends, which can actually be a really beautiful thing to find other people who are so passionate. So yeah, but still, yeah, it can be a tough kind of thing. And I guess there's a couple things about that. And I think the best piece of advice I can give you in this kind of context, and you can feel free to send me an email or something later for sure. But my parents always said to me, Ty, the key is to learn slowly but surely how to fit in, but never lose yourself. Right. So learn how to fit in, learn these social skills, all these other things, but never lose yourself. I think that's the best advice I could give you. Just because, whether it's you or we're talking about a friend or whoever it might be, there's some uniqueness there, and there's that different perspective. The root of awkward is afugur, which is an old Norse word, so I'm being really nerdy here. But it means facing a different direction. I actually love that definition, you know. And so I just always encourage folks to really hold on to that.
Thanks. I actually
Yeah.
also have another question,
Sure. Yeah,
if
yeah,
that's
yeah.
okay.
That's a real
So,
treat to get student questions. So I appreciate it.
so, so I totally get that. I think it, like you mentioned, like it is super important to like stay true to yourself, like
Mhm,
while also learning how to like navigate the world.
mhm,
Um, and I would agree, like it's more like socially acceptable to be awkward, and like a lot
mhm,
of people like will just like admit like, yeah, I'm an awkward person, and then that becomes like a sense of like community that we can like share with each other.
mhm.
Wh- like would you say that like social media also helps build that sense of community,
Mm.
or can it also be like debilitating and like make people more insecure about
Yeah,
themselves?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I feel like it's kind of like a double-edged sword, like so.
That's exactly it. So smart, smart hypothesis there. Um, so there's two sides to that double-edged sword. On the one hand, when the internet first kind of got rolling there, right, back in the days of blogs and Tumblr and that kind of thing, boy, it was kind of this great thing for awkward people, because all of a sudden, like these Dungeons and Dragons fans who are in the middle of Kansas, like we're like, but there's other people out there, I can connect with. And then that led to things like Comic-Con, where people would actually get together face to face, which is incredible, right? Now, so that's part of the good side of it, is that you can find your community and find your crowd. But you're right, there's another side to that, which is that if we spend too much time in our screens, just intuitively, right, we know that we're losing valuable face-to-face social interaction time. We need to be practicing those skills. So, the research on this is pretty early, so take this with a grain of salt, Bianca. But what I enjoy about the research we have so far is the the students who have pretty satisfying social lives, so they have like 3 or 4 friends they feel close to, and that those are gratifying relationships. They use social media differently than everybody else. So there's two things. One, they like and comment positively about their friends' successes more than other students do. Okay. So they see it as this way to be kind, basically. right? Without being sycophantic or about the whole thing. The second thing that they do is they see social media as a way to get face to face. So they'll do the typical things, but they're not going to be doom scrolling through and socially comparing themselves to everybody else and getting more depressed about it. They're like, hey, I'm going to do this for a little bit. And say, hey, great job, you, great job, you, great job, you. And now I'm going to DM somebody and say, hey, we should grab a coffee sometime. Right. So that's kind of the best advice I could give about the internet. We could talk about this for hours. Probably have a whole semester long course about it. But those are just some tidbits for you.
Good. Good. Thank you so much. Sherilyn, I know you've got a question.
I do. Dr. Ty, thank you so much for shedding light on this. And I think everyone listening probably is gaining some empathy, some ways to look at some people differently. I was particularly interested in when you said the because reason, like your parents said to you, you need to do this when you go into Wendy's because
Yes.
it shows respect. That was the word you used. And that threw up a flag in my mind because I think from educators, we're hearing so much lately that respect isn't as it used to be when we were growing up.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if respect is no longer that buzzword that turns the light bulb on and says, oh, okay, this is why. What are some other words of encouragement? What are some other becauses or words of encouragement?
Yeah. So that's a great point. Because I've certainly heard some of the same concerns, right? Broadly. One of the things I think you can do that's sometimes a shortcut and I actually find quite useful oftentimes is to think about the social skills projecting to those three things that make for a good long-term friendship. So we do this because it's the fair thing to do. We do this because it's the kind thing to do. We do this because it's, hey, look, you gotta be loyal to folks even if things aren't perfect here, right? And I'm not in a classroom every day, so I can't speak to the, day after day kind of persistence that this would take. But, I oftentimes find that, yeah, people want to be fair. They want to be, kind, and they want to be loyal. And sometimes they need to be reminded about the opposite, hey, are you in disrespect this person? Is that how you want to conduct yourself? Hey, so are you just gonna take off? I don't know what the cool word is. Maybe someone else can help us with this, but you're just gonna take off, on this person when they really need you. So I think sometimes just flipping that to its counter. I don't like to do that too often, but if you need to, just to get that effect, that can be a good foot in the door.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Here's my last question. Your parents, gee, they sound like they were amazing. And they really, this idea of the right tone and they just were so consistent about, we're going to practice this, setting the example, discussing this is what to expect. I thought that was really wonderful. Did they ever talk to you about the things you mentioned at the beginning about the importance of distance or eye contact or not obsessing? Was that also a part of the conversation they had with you?
Yeah, for sure. All the above, actually. So, worked on posture, actually, worked on eye contact, worked on all the things, really. With the obsessive interests, this might be useful for some folks who are parents or teachers or even students. I was really obsessed with basketball. I was a pretty mediocre player, but I was obsessed with it. I would practice till my fingers bled, actually, and no exaggeration. And so they were pretty clever about it. And my dad, who's the athletic director actually at my school, he said, hey, look, if you really want to help your team to the fullest capacity, you need to be a leader. You need to learn how to support your teammates in a way socially, right? that elevates them, because it's not just about the fundamentals. It's not just about dribbling and shooting and playing defense. There's this whole other layer, and he gave me examples. So I love Larry Bird at the time with the Celtics. He said, look at how Larry Bird treats his teammates. Look how invested he is when somebody's down. So yeah, that was a really great lesson for me. And I'm really glad you brought up the point too of tone, which is something I forgot to emphasize as much as I wanted, which was, anytime they would talk to me about these things, the tone was the first and the most important thing. So, what I would tell teachers and parents is, when we watch something awkward happen, or we watch someone we care about being awkward, it's anxiety provoking vicariously. And what we accidentally do sometimes is we infuse that anxiety into the situation, which is the last thing that the awkward person needs, right? Or the person who's not awkward and just kind of struggling. So if you can just gather yourself first, use your good mindfulness skills, and then come into it with just a very measured, even tone. So the phrase is, hey, Ty, no big deal, but I just wanted to point something out. I think you've won half the battle if you do that.
You really left us with some important ideas about leaning into what your child's interests are. I reminded someone once said, if you see a child's interest, pour gasoline on it. So you could sort of use that to teach these other things.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a wonderful day I've had. And so many of us, I know people who came back again to hear you again, the
Oh,
second.
great. Hello
So
again. Thanks for coming back.
it's so much to think about. And I think we'll all coming away with renewed sensitivity, but there are things we can all do to help, because even the most socially adept can use the handshake. That's too hard, or whatever it
Yeah.
might be. So
Yeah,
simple.
no, that's right. Sometimes empathizing with folks who struggle with something, even if we're really good at it, right? It's a way just to resharpen our skills and to also just gain a broader perspective, right, about the diversity that's out there. So I really appreciate folks coming and being interested, and I really enjoyed this series. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. This is where we go hug the kids. So we'll go hug the kids.
All right, great.
Okay.
Thanks so
Have a
much.
great evening. See
All
you
right.
next time.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much. Have a great evening.